Hello, my name is Henry Jenkins. I'm the director of the Comparative Media Studies program at MIT, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second Education Arcade Conference at E3. For those of you who were here last year, we welcome you back and hope that you'll pick up the conversation more or less where it got left off last year, actually with significant changes in the year in between. For those who are here the first time, we're delighted to see you and pleased to expand the community that's engaged with the discussion of educational games. Last year we had a conversation which included Warren Spector, Doug Lowenstein, Will Wright, Brenda Laurel, James G., David Buckingham, Kurt Squire, and many others who have been doing sort of groundbreaking thinking in the space of games, bringing together people from the industry and from education. And we hope to have a similar kind of conversation this year. The conversation seems to have hardly stopped since we were here a year ago. There have been a steady stream of events, including in recent months the Serious Games Summit at GDC, a policy meeting at the Department of Education, which many of us were at, the gathering at Bristol that a number of us were at, the virtual university event we hosted at MIT, and in the near future an important gathering on games and education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, among many others. These are heady days where people interested in serious and educational games scarcely have time to leave one airport before we're rushing to the other, right? And that's because I think something's really percolating out there. There's something building momentum that I think we all feel a part of when we think about this space. We're seeing more and more articles in the leading educational journals, both academic and popular, focused on the concept of educational games. And some of you have picked up this issue of Telemedium, which is a journal of media literacy, that a number of our speakers have pieces in, and which represents a pretty good sampling of the state of the debate, the state of the field, in thinking about the educational benefits of computer and video game. Let me roll down. We're seeing many political leaders, such as Virginia's Governor Mark Warner, seeking out information about games and education. We're seeing publications like the Los Angeles Times or the San Jose Mercury investigating the ideas that games may be a force for the betterment of society. We're seeing more and more leading foundations, among them MacArthur, Bell South, Sloan, Spencer, put money behind developing a better understanding of informal educational practices of digital youth and towards developing games that teach or embody educational policy. We're seeing more and more research groups spring up at leading institutions and universities around the world, developing new projects in the educational game space, among them UW-Madison, Stanford, Indiana, USC, UC Berkeley, UC Irvine, Georgia Tech, Michigan State, the IT University of Copenhagen, Malmo University, University of Bristol, and the SAGE project that brings together a number of leading Canadian institutions. We're seeing more and more efforts to explore the use of games for education beyond the classroom, whether it's through public television or public radio or through museums. We're seeing educators exploit the potential of off-the-shelf commercial games, such as Civilization, The Sims, and Animal Crossing in their classrooms. And we're seeing a growing number of educators discover the power of modifying existing games, such as Neverwinter Nights, to give them a leg up in the development of instructional games. We're seeing powerful new approaches to thinking about what educational games can look like. From Jane McGonigal's work on alternative reality games, which unleash the power of large-scale collaborations, to Eric Kloffer's use of location-specific handhelds to build augmented reality games where students mix and match fictional data with their observations of the real world, or David Schaefer's work on epistemic games, or Barry Joseph's Policy Slam. These are games which get kids to engage more intensely in their real-world environments and tackle problems confronting their own communities. We're seeing important new developments in the commercial game space, from Digital Mill's work on mini-games that help us understand the complexity of contemporary telecommunications, to Muzzy Lane's work in historic games, or 360 Kids' work in developing a vast array of educational games, to Leapfrog's launch of the Fly Pen, which will turn writing into play. We'll hear some interesting ideas from Peter Molyneux tomorrow about his new game, The Movies, which is sort of unleashing the power of kids to create new media artifacts and share them with each other. We're seeing more and more important new books by people like James G. or people like Stephen Johnson, which are arguing about the complexity of games and what they contribute to expanding the thinking capacity of our society. As your host, the Education Arcade, we represent a collaboration of people at MIT primarily who are involved in thinking about the future of educational gaming. Over the last year, we've been making progress as well, and you're going to hear some at this conference about the user testing that's going on around our game revolution, as well as some of the breakthroughs that are going on in augmented reality games through Eric Kloffer's group. Through the Comparative Media Studies program, we're also extending to think more seriously about the skill sets that students will need to learn and communicate in the 21st century. We've just received an important grant from the MacArthur Foundation, which is helping us sort of think systematically about what those skills are, trying to bring together traditional literacy, modern mass media, digital literacy, to rethink from the bottom up, in a way, what role media and communications plays in the classrooms. Our mission is to think across curriculum, to think across subject areas, and to again sort of examine the future. Now, games play only a small part in that project, but I think that the work we're doing there complements in some significant ways the work that we've been doing in educational gaming. And some of the themes that seem central to that work that I think we're going to hear talked about rather a lot here is, for example, collective intelligence and collaboration. That is, how do we get kids learning to use the resources of the digital environment to share knowledge with each other, to work together to brainstorm and solve problems. And it seems that the educational game space is one of those spaces where exciting work is already being done in that area. We're interested in particularly in thinking about how to help kids make logical moves across different layers of representation, what Gunter Kress calls multimodality. And it seems to be more and more important, not just that we can collect information, but that we understand the affordances, the potentials of different channels of communication, that we can swift rapidly as we multitask from one kind of media representation to another. And again, educational gaming is absolutely central to that space. And in return, as I argued last year, you can't think about putting games in the classroom without also teaching kids to think critically about how games represent the world. We shouldn't have done it with any of the educational resources that are in the classroom today. Maps, for example, are subject to enormous distortion if read without a critical eye. So it's in the same way that we should be teaching kids to read maps, charts, graphs, other ways of representing the world, we also need to be thinking about games and media literacy side by side. Another important dimension of our thinking about media literacy has been the idea that it is, in the same way that we would not call someone literate if they could read but not write, we should not call someone literate if they can consume media but not produce it. This should be a fundamental philosophy. And again, this is a space where educational games have made a huge difference, that we are more and more seeing projects where kids are designing their own games, where kids are participating in sharing games they've made with each other, that space is where a lot of excitement is going on in the educational game space. And it also, in turn, ought to be a place where the excitement is going on media and digital literacy space. Now, one of the problems in an age where schools are defunding art and music is that talk about educational gaming and talk about games as educational without sort of going toward the laissez-faire position that, well, if kids are playing a lot of games outside of the classroom, then they're already learning this stuff, and why bring it into the classroom at all? You know, that's the serious challenge of this. Well, one explanation, there are many, of course, but one explanation is to think about two problems. One is right now, if we look across the United States, the digital divide as it was described in the 1990s is coming to an end. If not for every kid, then for most kids. With the exception of certain rural areas and certain Indian reservations, which are very serious spaces that we should be paying attention to. But with the exception of that, most American kids, it seems, have access to computers. But where they access the computer varies enormously. To have access at school or in the public library is not the same thing as having access to technologies in your everyday life that you live with, that you create with, that you communicate with, that are integral to the way you live your life. We might think of that as a new hidden curriculum. In the past, we talked about parents who took their kids to art museums and played symphony records and read aloud to them as preparing them for the expectations of the school and of the future. That those middle-class kids who had those experiences tended to already do better in the classroom than those kids who did not. So let's think about the current moment then as the new hidden curriculum is what I'm calling the participation gap. That is, on the one hand, the best kids, the kids who are gaming, the kids who are using instant messaging, the kids who are creating and sharing what they create via the internet are being de-skilled as they enter the classroom. Their best ways of learning and understanding the world are being taken away from them. It's like taking my glasses away when I walk through the door and asking me if I can see the blackboard. It is simply the wrong way to be responding to such kids. On the other hand, Those kids who grow up in a world without access to those technologies through the home, who are not allowed to participate fully in the new digital culture, are being left behind. And so the reason we need to integrate digital literacies and educational games into the classroom is to create a space where those two groups can meet each other, where we can respond to the two sides of the participation divide, the participation gap, and begin to explore how we harness the enormous power of these technologies for education. That's I think, one of the challenges we face as we go forward. Now, as I was reading last year's discussion in the Telemedium, there's a transcript of the conversation we had here with Will Wright last year in this Telemedium issue. One of the things that didn't really stick out at me at the time, but keeps haunting me in the last couple of days, is Will Wright's argument that the best educational games will be interdisciplinary. He was protesting the idea that we simply could take games and shoehorn them into existing school subjects and have them achieve the full potential of the medium. What Will Wright is holding out there is the idea that games will force us to rethink the configuration of schools. That games will force us to think about new structures of knowledge. That games will require us to engage with the educational process in a different way, one which changes the relations between mentors and mentorees. Now that's a scary thought, right? There's no question that schools are very good at resisting change on that level, right? The school's never really adequately caught up with the idea of the book, let alone any other media that's come subsequently. So we have to sort of imagine how we deal with that space, particularly in the context of educational policy, which makes it very difficult to innovate and makes it very difficult to achieve the depth of learning that games potentially recognize. Like good gamers, what we have to do is learn to route around obstacles. We have to find the warp zones that allow us to get through the difficult patches and keep moving forward. And for many of us right now, that means after-school programs. It means charter schools. It means private schools. It means organizations like churches and scouting groups, institutions like museums and parks. The spaces where we learn outside of the classroom seem to be the place where educational gaming is moving forward the most. But I think we make a mistake if we simply give up on the schools. We cannot afford to just abandon public education as a space where kids learn. When given a chance to really reflect on the nature of games as a medium, we're finding that many teachers seem eager to have them in their classrooms. Ask if they want something which motivates kids, that offers them powerful simulations and visualizations, enables experimentation and exploration, supports peer-to-peer teaching and distant collaboration, and offers a scaffolding around which other educational activities can be strung. I think most teachers would say, hell yes. Right? And if we understand games as representing those opportunities, as many of the people here at this event have and will argue, then I think we have to hold open to teachers a new description of games. We have to do the public outreach necessary to get teachers in schools thinking about games in new terms. And that's part of what we're going to do. Now to do that, I think we have to win this battle, we need to remind people that role-playing gaming has long been a constant, an important part of teaching literature or social science. Even the idea of constructing imaginary micro-worlds to inspire and motivate learning is hardly new. In a recent essay, Shirley Teresa Waja writes about 18th and 19th century cabinets of curiosities and finds there what I would see as important parallels to the kind of media mixed cultures we're seeing at the present moment. In some cases, these collections were made by children as they explored the world around them, collecting rocks, shells, butterfly wings, animal bones, pine cones, nuts, acorns. In other cases, they were put together by adults with specific pedagogical goals and were designed to model on a small scale the natural world or to demonstrate some specific cultural or historical event. Waja notes that over time, manufacturers offered ceramic or glass figurines which could be incorporated into these collections and even created toys which tied directly into the textbooks they were reading at school. Often these small toys came with explanatory cards which became collectibles in their own right. So kids in the 18th century would bring cards to school and compare with each other the things that they held in their collections. Engaging in these materials, in shaping or organizing these collections, kids developed a sense of immediate connection to the concepts they embody, a sensation that was assumed to ultimately foster deeper levels of understanding and appreciation. Children got together to talk about and trade the materials of their collections, providing a context for shared learning and reflection. They used the figurines as avatars to enact stories that were culturally important to them, and in the process to experience what it would be like to actively assume adult roles. In particular, through the focus on natural history, which was a central theme of these, sort of what we now call creationism, a fusion of biblical history and natural history seemed to be the dominant spirit of these figurines. And in particular, they were taught to become stewards of nature. And it was telling that the generation which followed would, for example, lobby for the creation of the National Park Service. If you go back and read some of the autobiographical writings of Teddy Roosevelt, for example, the play with these collections is absolutely central to his description of how he made sense of the world and how he connected with nature. We also might connect them to the emergence of 19th century informal learning practices, such as scouting, which grew up to encourage collecting, exploring, peer-to-peer teaching, many of the things we see virtuous in games. Now, this historic example struck me for two reasons. First of all, it suggests that play, toys, and games have a long history in education. No surprise to anyone in this room. Hunting cultures played with bows and arrows, and we should expect that the information society will play with computer games. Yet what these games share in common is the idea that kids learn by actively imitating the activities of the adult world, and more often than not, they do so by developing a sense of autonomy and agency with a parallel world. The world inside the magic circle, to use Eric Zimmerman's phrase. The miniature world of the Wonder Cabinet, to talk about what Wajia is describing to us. The micro worlds of contemporary games. Second, the emergence of we see there at the same time, the emergence of multiple strategies to introduce this educational innovation into the world. The kids themselves are actively producing and collecting materials. Adults are designing materials for their own children or through children that are in their classrooms. And finally, commercial culture kicks in and begins to make manufacture versions of these to get them into wider distribution. So we have to recognize this was an innovation that was brought about through multiple vantage points. And I think that's something we need to reflect on as we go through our conversation this year. We are very grateful for the support we've received from the ESA and from our various sponsors, Leapfrog and Bell South. We believe that industry ultimately has important roles to play in the development and distribution of educational games. We were discouraged that at last year's conference, however, many of the industry people who spoke expressed skepticism that the development of educational games would fit within the business plans of their companies in the near future. We constantly got this message that the L word, learning, was something that frightened many of the game manufacturers. And some people jokingly said, please don't call our games learning games. And I wasn't sure how hard they were joking at that point. And I think it's a serious problem we have to think about. Because we're caught on the one level in a situation where schools will not adopt educational games unless they're proven effective in promoting learning and unless they're readily available, easy to use, and cheap to buy. On the other hand, the industry doesn't seem ready to produce educational games unless they can be guaranteed a market and unless they have a way of shortcutting through the elaborate adoption process that shapes American education. So that's the dilemma I think we face. And the more I've pulled back and thought about the conversation last year, that's the challenge that it seems to me we have to come to grips with. In the short run, I think that means educational institutions, foundations, and government have important roles to play in doing the bleeding edge experiments, in rallying support among the public, in educating teachers in how to deploy games in their classroom and why, in lowering the cost of production and the risk of investment in this area, in helping to streamline the process for adapting games, and for taking existing commercial games and retrofitting them for educational use. Those are things we can do right now. Those are things that are going on right now. Those are very important roles. Governments can help with that. At the same time, we think that the games industry reluctance to enter this space opens up opportunities for other kinds of companies, those traditionally focused on the educational market, to test alternative strategies and promote emerging products. We think that innovative design, in fact, may make up for the eye candy of the commercial games, that there are ways, we'll hear some interesting stuff about innovative and creative design practices at the convention, and some of those don't necessarily require budgets and graphics on the scale that are produced by mainstream industry. So we have to not lower our expectations, but shift them in new directions which reflect the potential of this media that the industry itself has failed to realize, and to challenge the industry to move in new directions. Big work. So we hope that you'll leave this conference ready to join us in that fight. Better informed about the most recent developments in educational gaming, more excited about the rich potentials of the still emerging medium, and more determined than ever to do what it takes to make some of these dreams of ours a reality. So let's the games begin.